Welcome back. This time we're talking about the Florida Project, written and directed by Sean Baker, who previously gave us the film Tangerine. We're a few weeks into November now as I film this video, and we're officially into the opening days of the Oscar bait season. And the Florida Project is a movie that I really do think we're going to hear a lot about when award season kicks off, actually in a few weeks. And likely it's going to be one of those movies that most people have never heard of before, unless you watch my channel and are watching this video. Or if you just heard about it elsewhere because you like movies and like good movies, because this is a really good movie. I knew very little about it going in. I have not seen Tangerine or any other film from Sean Baker. But I live in Florida, and I live about 3.5 hours away from Orlando, where this movie is set. So I was very intrigued. It focuses on a number of characters who are living on what many would consider the fringes of society. They're living essentially week to week in motels. And while this film is definitely a creature of its setting, the basic story could be recreated essentially anywhere. I live in a small town in North Florida, and I know there are people here who live in the motels lining the highways. And honestly, since the interstate came through, they're one of the main reasons why those motels are still open. Much of the film is told through the point of view of 6-year-old Mooney, played by newcomer Brooklynn Prince, a young girl who is maybe a couple steps above feral. She's left alone by her mother, Haley, played by fellow newcomer Bria Vinaite. I'm not sure if I got that name right at all. And she and her friends pretty much just roam around their motel, the surrounding motels, and pretty much everywhere else they want to go in urban Orlando, only a stone's throw away from Walt Disney World, which is obviously a world very much unlike the world that these people are living in. And this is really one of those films that doesn't have a defined plot. It essentially just follows these characters, Mooney and her friends, and Haley, and the motel manager, Bobby, played by Willem Dafoe, the only real well-known actor in this cast, over the course of more or less a summer. I could compare this movie to a number of other films, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just trying to give you an idea of what you're going to be getting here. In some ways, I can compare it to Moonlight because it has a very definitive sense of place. Like I said, this is Orlando. Moonlight was definitely South Florida, but the story really could be translated anywhere. But this story is just seeped in that Orlando setting. My nephew actually lives in Orlando. I go down there quite often, and a lot of the backdrops I drove past, and key word being I drove past. I'm either going to the parks or going to some other touristy thing, and where these characters are living are the place that you drive by. You don't stop there. There's actually a moment in the film where this honeymoon couple thought they were staying at the Magic Kingdom, but the motel that Mooney and her mother live at is the Magic Kingdom, and you can tell that they want no part of this part of Orlando. The other movie I could compare it to would be The Beasts of the Southern Wild. It's pretty obvious if you've seen that movie because that was another film about people living on the fringes of society, and it was told from the point of view of a young girl. And there's that naivety, that innocence, and it's hard to call Mooney innocent. She's a very street smart 6-year-old, but she's also still a 6-year-old. The way she sees the world is through the eyes of a 6-year-old and doesn't always see the dangers around her, and seeing how, honestly, just how bad her life is, which in a lot of ways is good, but also doesn't know how bad it really is. Unlike that film, this film does jump perspectives. We do get to see some scenes from the point of view of her mother as well as Bobby to kind of flesh out what's happening that during events that Mooney is not necessarily present for, or at least aware enough of to have her attention on. And the other film I could kind of compare this to, and it's sort of out of left field, would be Richard Linklater's Everybody Wants Some. That was a movie that followed a number of characters over the course of a weekend. And like this one, there really wasn't a central plot. It was basically what happens to these characters over the course of a weekend. And possibly because of that, or just the great writing from Richard Linklater, like we have some really good writing here from Sean Baker, those characters never felt like characters. It felt like they had just taken a camera and gone and filmed these characters interacting with their world. Now, that film was set in 1980, so obviously you knew it was a film. If you had told me that this film, the Florida Project, was a documentary and they just were following people around this motel in Orlando, I might have bought into it. Now, obviously, Willem Dafoe kind of breaks that illusion, but these characters are so well just realized. It's never feels like they're spouting off dialogue written on a page. I don't know how you write dialogue like this. I would love to be a screenwriter. I have no idea how you write dialogue this honest, this realistic. There's one line from Mooney that's sort of like that heartbreaking line, and they show it in the trailer. It's a great line, great moment. It's a great insight into her character. And that was the one time where I felt like that was some great writing there. And I'm not dissing it, because I did think it was great writing, but it was one of the only times I felt that any line uttered in this movie was written on a page somewhere. It just felt like these characters were just spontaneously spouting off this dialogue. It felt that real. The other thing that this film does a good job of is, like I said, Mooney's situation is not a good one. Her mother is not a great mother, but you can see that she's doing a lot of what she does to try to provide for her daughter, just not not always making the best decision, and she has anger problems, and a lot of situations would probably be better if she hadn't acted the way she did. She's not an innocent victim of circumstance in every moment of her life. She has a raw deal, but she often makes it worse. But the film never tries to judge. It is just presenting these situations and letting the audience make their own determination. As I said, she's not a great mother, but she does care for her daughter. And that comes through, and we can make our own determination on how we want to view these characters by the time we get to the end of the film. And speaking of the end, that is really the only false note of this movie. And when I say that, I'm literally talking about the last 45 to 60 seconds of this movie. Anytime you have a movie like this, like with Everybody Wants Somewhere, there's really not a central plot. The key is, how do you end it? In that film, it essentially ended when the weekend was over and they had to start going to class. Here, there's a less defined ending that they could have gone with. There are situations, there's a building tension where we can see that Haley's decisions are starting to come back to haunt her, and through her, Mooney as well. How you would end that, I don't know. What they chose to do, literally the last 60 seconds of the movie, I'm not going to spoil it, don't worry about that, I just didn't like it. It felt so unauthentic compared to everything that had come before it. And it was both what happened as well as the presentation. It just did not work for me, and it's sad that that's the final note of this film. I mean, if they had nailed that landing, this would have been probably easily top 5 for the year that I've seen so far. May still make it into the top 10. It's definitely worth seeing, especially if you're interested in these type of stories. It's definitely not a mainstream film. But if you've ever been to Orlando or live in Florida, definitely check this out. I will say the false note of the ending does not ruin everything that came before it. It's a memorable false note, and it really hurt this film. But it's still one that I can highly recommend if you're into these more art house, Oscar bait type movies. And I do think this is one that we're going to hear more about as the award season picks up. So I'm going to turn it over to you at this point. If you've seen the Florida Project. What did you think about it? And if you haven't, and if you've been to Orlando, what's your favorite amusement park in Orlando? I'll see what you get there. As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some of my other reviews, and until next time, I'll see you at the movies.